Thank you for inviting me to participate in this meeting. I'm honored to be here. And greetings from Whidbey Island, the Pacific Northwest, where we're just starting our day at 6:20 a.m. here. This work is done in collaboration with Lobsang Dondap, a doctor of traditional Tibetan medicine, and Amy Banter, a holistic family medicine practitioner who is also a professor of medicine for 10 years. And the three of us have been collaborating for the last 24 years, and I'm going to share our integrative approach to Tibetan medicine and longevity. And then most recently, we've been collaborating with Garrett Tubman, a doctor of physical therapy, and I'll be sharing his offerings toward the end of my talk. Let me just hide this here. So Tibetan medicine is an ancient mind-body medicine with a focus on lifestyle, prevention, and nature. And modern Tibetan medicine is a blend of indigenous Tibetan shamanistic bone medicine and Ayurvedic medicines, along with elements from Chinese, Persian, and Galenic medical influences, but mostly the two, the indigenous and Ayurvedic. Our approach is to add a modern iteration of integration with the addition of functional medicine. And Tibetan medicine has philosophical links with Buddhism and the 5 elements of earth, water, fire, wind, and space, and the 3 mental poisons of attachment, anger, and ignorance. And there's an 8-part clinical science of Tibetan medicine that includes longevity, which has been studied for over 1,500 years. And this 8-part science includes physiology and diseases of the adult body, pediatrics, gynecology, nervous system disorders, wounds and trauma, toxicology, longevity, and infertility and aphrodisiacs. And in our integrative work, we focus primarily on longevity, nervous system disorders, and infertility, though we've overlapped with all this 8-fold, including all ages. And the 3 humors are the origination of suffering, and that's the tridosha from Ayurveda. And so they are formed from the 5 elements of earth, water, fire, wind, and space. And so wind is wind in the tridosha, referred to as lung or vata. Fire is bile or tripa, which is pitta. And earth and water combine to form phlegm or bagan. And space pervades all. So attachment or greed, well, the mental poisons, leads to wind disorders that begin in the lower body. Anger, aversion results in bile disorders that begin in the center body, such as the liver and gallbladder. And ignorance or delusion result in phlegm disorders that begin in the head. In the next 2 slides, I'm going to show some tables that are from previous publications, so I'll review them briefly, and in the next slide, I give the references from some papers from 2009. But in the wind, bile, phlegm, the Tibetan names are lung, tripa, and bagan. The Ayurvedic names are vata, pitta, kapha, and they correlate with channels and organs. And in our previous work, we've expanded that to the nervous system function, metabolism, and structure, and have even interpreted it at the molecular level for myelin lipids and their qualities. What I want to point out here is with the age, that wind dominates more after the age of 50, whereas bile or fire, that energetic fire, is a young adult, and the phlegm is more in a child. So in the longevity protocols, typically at about the age 50 for prevention and to promote longevity, the longevity protocols were part of the medicine, like the preventive care, as I'll be describing later. And then the quality of these 3 humors: wind has a quality of cold and deficiency that moves up in the body. Bile or fire has a quality of hot and excess that moves up in the body. And bagan or phlegm has a quality of cold or deficiency that moves down in the body. And we described this in detail in these 2 publications in the Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences in 2009. And I have my email at the end of this talk if anyone would like these papers. And we have 4 published and 2 in preparation that I'm happy to share. So in Tibetan medicine, for any imbalance or disease with a clinical pathological nature, there is an imbalance of these three, the three humors, Chusur, and Shrin. And I've described a bit the three humors of the wind, bile, phlegm, and Chusur is also referred to as yellow water, and that's the body's fluids, including lymph fluid, blood plasma, interstitial fluid, intra and extracellular fluid, cerebral spinal fluid, and it relates to spread of the disease through the body. And we believe that Chusur is very similar to the interstitium, also akin to fascia that was recently described by Neil Teese. Srin, the literal translation is bugs, and the modern nomenclature is microorganisms. And interestingly, for the last 1,500 years in Tibetan medicine, they've had a description of 84,000 microorganisms and 84,000 mental afflictions. So this is an ancient description of the mind-body connection, and that healing begins in the gut. And the spiral-shaped organisms are of wind nature, that which moves, that would be Lyme, syphilis, cholera, H. pylori, pathogenic organisms that cause change in the body. Rod-shaped organisms are of a bile nature, and the round or cup's eye-shaped organisms are of a phlegm nature. So now I'm going to show how we're integrating Tibetan medicine with the modern functional medicine, and they both use a tree allegory for the descriptions of their medicines. So in Tibetan medicine, there are 3 trees that are very elaborate, and the entire medical system has been painted into a series of these tankas that describe the medicine. But with the tree of physiology and pathophysiology, there's 1 root and 2 trunks for the healthy and diseased organism. And then there are trees of diagnosis and treatment. And the tree of diagnosis has 1 root and 3 trunks for the observation, the palpation or their pulse reading, and the questioning. And then the tree of treatment has 1 root and 4 trunks for the descriptions of nutrition, behavior, medicines, and methods of treatment or accessory therapies. So to summarize that, the tree allegory has 3 roots and 9 trunks to describe the healthy and diseased organism, their diagnosis with observation, palpation, and questioning. And the observation includes a urine analysis that I'll be sharing. And then their treatment includes nutrition, behavior, medicines, including herbs and herb minerals, and methods of treatment that are accessory therapies. Then in functional medicine, which is a modern systems biology medicine, a tree allegory is also used. And so in current biomedicine, a patient will have signs or symptoms, an organ system diagnosis, and sent to a specialist that will give a treatment for the signs and symptoms. Whereas in functional medicine, we seek to get to the root cause of these signs and symptoms. And essentially, it's like, what do you need to get and remove from your body? Are they environmental pollutants, microorganism imbalance, trauma, physical or emotional, relationships and networks, stress and resilience? And we know stress is a, strong proponent of aging. Nutrition and hydration, and that could be nutrients that you need to get, or maybe foods you need to remove from your body, exercise and movement, and sleep and relaxation. If any of these are out of balance, it can trigger our genetic predisposition, but our DNA is not our destiny. But if that's triggered, then that can lead to the signs and symptoms. Similarly, our mental, emotional, and spiritual influences, our attitudes and beliefs, can trigger our genetic predisposition. So this is again showing the mind-body connection. So on the next slide, I'm going to zoom in to this trunk of the tree to show how in functional medicine, rather than the body being organized by organ systems, it's kind of simplified into functional systems, and they all crosstalk. So sometimes you could have, like let's say a neurological symptom, and it might begin in your liver. And so that's the beauty of this approach, is kind of getting to the root cause. But similar to Tibetan medicine, healing begins in the gut, and our digestion and absorption, and our immunity begins in the gut. And then defense and repair is the rest of our immunity. Energy is cellular energy to do work, our mitochondria, how our body makes ATP. Biotransformation and elimination is how we detox and remove from our body. We especially look at it in the liver, but we also detox through our gut, our kidneys, our skin, our lungs. Transport is our cardiovascular and lymph system and how we move things around in the body. And that is wind or lung in Tibetan medicine. Communication is our hormones and neurotransmitters and how they crosstalk. And then structure is our physical structure from micro to macro. And at the center or heart of it all is our mental and emotional and spiritual well-being. And again, as with Tibetan medicine, showing the mind-body connection. And then for the intake in functional medicine, we view it through the lens of antecedents, triggers, and mediators. What are our genetic and environmental predisposing factors? What are the activators that trigger the onset of symptoms? And what is perpetuating to the ongoing imbalance? In a sense, what do we need to get or remove from the body? So this slide summarized then the Tibetan longevity protocols for regeneration and how we are integrating them with functional medicine. And what we've learned is that sequence and dose are key. And this is described in theory in our paper, Tibetan Medicine and Regeneration. In this talk, I'm going to share more on how we're integrating it with functional medicine. But the Tibetan longevity protocols are to first tonify the body, then detoxify, and then rejuvenate. And we take this approach, whether it's someone who's healthy coming to us, wanting just to have, a healthy lifespan, or if it's somebody very ill wanting to restore balance. So tonify with a functional medicine approach, we evaluate and balance the gut microbiome, we implement dietary modifications, and we balance the biochemistry with supplements as needed. And that includes the hormones, nutrient deficiencies, and the cardiovascular system. And we also integrate the Tibetan herb and herb mineral formulas and tinctures. Once that's done, then we detoxify, because if you detoxify before this is balanced, you can cause more harm. And so that involves the safe removal of heavy metals, organic solvents, and pesticides and microorganisms with supplements as needed. And then we also use Tibetan herb and herb mineral formulas and tinctures. And there's some very kind of potent and effective Tibetan medicines for detoxification. And we've rarely needed to use prescription medicines, but Dr. Banter is available for that as needed. And then rejuvenation includes the potential use of Tibetan herb mineral precious pills, nectars, herbal baths, medicated oils and massage, moxibustion, and Tibetan yogic practices, and the Nubi direct current device for the functional medicine approach. So tonify, detoxify, and then rejuvenate. Sequence and dose are key. So then I'm going to review the Tibetan diagnosis of the body and then the functional medicine diagnosis and how we integrate the two. But this is back to that tree with the visualization, palpation, and interrogation. And for all conditions seeking balance, we see that the lung or wind excess and badkan or phlegm deficiency coexist. Wind excess and phlegm deficiency coexist. Wind deficiency and phlegm excess coexist. And then there can be conditions of tripa or fire excess and tripa or fire deficiency. So to balance, we use food first, then herbs, then supplements, then prescriptions. And we've learned that less is more to not fan the flame of fire and inflammation. So typically, maybe we'll use 2 Tibetan herbal formulas a day, one in the morning, one in the evening, and a few supplements at a time, but we do not want to overload the body. So I'm going to give a little bit now on the Tibetan urine analysis, which is very unique to this traditional medicine system. And it's simple and effective, and it's a way to, get care to people in remote parts of the world who do not have access to labs. But the urine, the first morning urine, is evaluated for color, odor, sediment, and the size of bubbles when stirring, and then the rate of dissolution of those bubbles. So in the condition of the wind excess and phlegm deficiency, the urine will be a bluish white in color, no sediment or odor, have big bubbles that disappear quickly, similar to the properties of wind. If there's a wind deficiency and a phlegm excess, the urine is pale and white with no sediment or odor and have small bubbles that are slow to disappear, like a lot of phlegm. If there's a tripa or fire excess, the urine is pale yellow or possibly darker in color with a strong odor and sediment and small bubbles that disappear quickly. The odor and sediment reflect albumin in the urine and fire or inflammation. And then if there's a tripa or fire deficiency, the urine is white with big and stable bubbles that do not disappear, reflecting a cold condition. And then palpation is the Tibetan pulse analysis. And the Tibetan physician will palpate the radial pulse with the opposite hand of the patient at 3 locations in 2 depths to monitor the functions of the body as relates to the 3 humors and the 5 elements, and provide a deeper understanding of the root cause of imbalance as relates to the systems and organs that are on those 3 locations in 2 depths. And this is a very subtle energetic reading of the transmission of system and organ information through the body, so it can be very personalized per physician. The pulse is evaluated for its frequency, its amplitude, and its tension or the tightness as relates to the 3 nipa or 3 humors and the combination of these. So again, back to the lung excess Bhagkan deficiency or wind excess phlegm deficiency. The pulse is rapid and superficial with no pressure underneath. It's weak, slow, and sinking. With a lung deficiency or Bhagkan excess, the pulse is slow and thick, not superficial, but under the muscle. And if there's a fire excess or a tripa excess, the pulse is rapid and tight, both superficially and deep. And if there's a tripa deficiency or fire deficiency, the pulse is slow and sinking, both superficially and deep. So in functional Tibetan medicine, our integration of the 2, we use the sequence of the longevity protocols to tonify, detoxify, and rejuvenate, and we integrate it with functional labs and their interventions. And in Tibetan medicine, the formation of the body is defined by the cycling of nutrition into 7 tissues in this sequence. So the food that we eat cycles into plasma, then blood, then muscle, fat, bone, marrow, and seminal fluid or hormones. And these 7 tissues must be in balance for adequate embryological development and for the maintenance through life and longevity. And there is an overlap of infertility and longevity. And, this is Dr. Lovesong has 84 babies now in this world as a result of his infertility treatment that overlaps with this approach that I'm sharing. We obtain functional laboratory data to correspond with this sequence. Again, sequence and dose are key. So I wanted to share that in addition to my clinical, background, I also have a doctorate in physical chemistry, and I've spent the majority of my career in the university doing medical research in physics, chemistry, bioengineering, and I've been doing technical development of labs to monitor the nervous system. And so as I've gone into the clinic with functional medicine, I have this background of, laboratory technical development. So I'm going to be showing several commercial labs here. It happens to be the ones that we're using now in the clinic, but I've kind of been my own guinea pig, where if I do DNA, I do many DNA tests on myself, or the same with the microbiome or nutrients. And so I want to show these labs to mainly share this sequence of the integration with Tibetan medicine, not necessarily to promote one particular commercial lab. But in general, I begin with genetics and the microbiome and looking at hormones, because remember, the hormones are that seventh tissue that the nutrients are channeled into. And if they're out of balance, then you do not have the reserve to restore balance. I do like this genetic test, 3x4 genetics, because they organize their data through pathways and it's color coded. So as a clinician, it's very quick and easy for me to understand right away where to begin. Where if something is dark purple or light purple, it has a potential very high or high impact to be triggered out of balance. And it's also organized by cellular pathways, system, cardiovascular health. And there are many genes per pathway, and they have a computer algorithm that assigns it this score. They also have pathways for energy, for kind of weight gain and weight loss resistance, activity and exercise, and some nutrients. And then I look at the gut. And I've used many tests to evaluate the gut microbiome. This one is particularly interesting, the BiomeFX, because they look at the whole genome of the microbes for the keystone species and pathogens, but they also look at the functional microbiome. You know, the microbes in there are making vitamins and antioxidants and recycling our estrogen. There's the psychobiome, looking at neurotransmitters and glutathione. So I like comparing that back to the genetics. But I also began with looking at markers of intestinal health to make sure the upper digestion is working well with the pancreatic enzymes. The beta-glucuronidase is a marker of your liver function, and are you metabolizing the hormones well? Is there any occult blood, the immune response, inflammation, and zonulin, which is one of many markers of intestinal permeability. And then, we will integrate both some supplements as needed or Tibetan herbal preparations for restoring the gut. And then again, we begin with the hormones. And I especially like to look at the adrenal hormones and the diurnal cortisol and DHEA. And as you can see in this client, the adrenals are flatlined. They're in adrenal exhaustion. So if you do not build up the adrenal reserves, then how do you have the energy for, restoring balance and promoting longevity? But another reason I begin here is to look at the metabolism of the hormones through the liver. And this is a flow chart showing how all the hormones interconvert to one another. But here, there are three forms of the estrogen: estrone, estradiol, estriol. And if it's not metabolized well through the liver and you build up this 4-hydroxyestrone, it can bind to DNA and damage it. And I've had several people come to me with a diagnosis of cancer, and indeed, they had an elevation of this metabolite. So I always want to make sure that the liver's working well before I start adding more to the system and overloading it. And this is how that works. Here's a cartoon of the liver, and all toxins go through the liver before they go into the stool and urine. And they're processed in two phases. And in phase one, the toxins are made more water soluble to be fed into phase two. But if phase two isn't working well, then you build up these reactive intermediaries and cause secondary tissue damage. So again, we begin with the gut and the liver before we move on. And then we look at nutrients. And I like this nutrient panel, but there are many ways to assess nutrients, and they're all valid. The reason I'm showing this is because they have functional imbalance scores with the antioxidants, mitochondria, inflammation, toxins, methylation, that correlate well with the genetic test that I'm using. But I usually evaluate the gut first, because if the gut is very disrupted, then if you balance that first, then you may be absorbing your nutrients better through your food. And then we also look at cardiovascular inflammation, markers such as homocysteine, which is involved with methylation, and your B vitamins, and lipoprotein A, which is a marker of genetic vascular inflammation. And these two are often not in your standard cardiovascular panels, but we find them to be elevated a lot, including in healthy people who are trying to promote longevity. And then as needed, we'll look at specialty tests for, the immune functions and all the subcategories of lymphocytes or neurotransmitters. And so that's the functional medicine diagnosis. And then we've got the Tibetan medicine diagnosis. And now I'm going to go into the treatment approaches for promoting longevity. So there's a generalized 3-humor treatment approach with Tibetan medicine, where if someone is predominantly of a bile or fire constitution, inflammation, the generalized treatment includes diet, gentle exercise, and meditation. They do not want to do vigorous exercise because that can fan the flames of the fire. Now, if there's Bakken or phlegm imbalance, diet and more vigorous exercise to get that kind of phlegm or, moving, the inertia, and meditation. If there's a lung or wind imbalance, which is typical of neurological and cardiovascular imbalances, then it's diet, gentle exercise, herbs, accessory treatments, and meditation. So the therapeutic actions of the 6 tastes and the hot or cold potencies are used for both foods and herbs to balance symptoms and the microbiome. And the 6 tastes in Tibetan medicine are sweet, sour, salty, bitter, astringent, and pungent. And each of these tastes are a combination of 2 of the 5 elements. And then they have, like, sweet has cool properties, sour, hot, etc. And these tastes then are used to balance the 3 humors. And then again, the 3 humors were, identified to the urine and pulse analysis and the questioning. But what's more interesting here are what are called the post-digestion tastes, and they're more powerful for clinical applications. So the sweet, sour, salty, bitter, astringent, pungent are modified through our post-digestion as follows. Sour transforms into sour, sweet and salty transform into sweet, and bitter, astringent, and pungent transform into bitter. And so then the sour increases fire, bitter increases wind, and sweet increases phlegm. And interestingly, recently, sour, sweet, and bitter receptors have been identified scientifically in the human body and could relate to these post-digestion tastes that have been identified for 1,500 years and help to fine-tune nutrition as medicine in the future. Then the Tibetan herbal formulas are based on these properties, not only the taste and the potencies of hot or cold, but 8 qualities and secondary qualities, which are, a lot more detail than beyond the scope of this talk. And then this slide shows the Nubi direct current device. Its image of the device is shown here, and that these leads coming out of it have electrodes that are applied to the body, various places, and it's a direct current rather than alternating current, such as with the TENS unit. And it has a carrier waveform that dissipates heat and charge buildup, allowing for higher intensity direct current stimulation to the body without irritation. And this direct current imitates the action potentials of both the peripheral and central nervous system and can comfortably achieve more power delivery and intensity into the muscle fibers and the sensory afferent pathways to accelerate the body's tissue healing abilities. And there's one setting called the master reset, where 2 electrodes are put on the back of the neck and 2 on the bottom of the feet, and it stimulates the vagus nerve. And so it's passed through the whole body, and it encourages calmness and enhanced parasympathetic nervous system response. And, stress promotes aging. So by keeping one in this parasympathetic response, it can be anti-aging. And we can apply those electrodes to muscles, and it stimulates them kind of similar to exercise and to increase muscle mass, which also promotes longevity, because we know that the sarcopenia and the loss of muscle mass occurs with aging, and this is a way to help build muscle. And then you can use that on the muscles while you're moving, and it helps maintain mobility and balance to prevent falls that occur with aging. There are many proposed mechanisms of action of the newbie that have been, the direct current has been studied on the cellular level, but it includes effects on the mitochondria and release of nitric oxide, among others. So I wanted to share here a bit on my personal experience with this integration of Tibetan and functional medicine. Back in 2000, I was working at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and I had just started collaborating with Dr. Dondup and Dr. Banter. And I was directing a center for the study of neurodegenerative disorders, where you take an integrative approach to studying the nervous system, approaches in physics and engineering, chemistry, cell biology. And then we also had a 3-acre medicinal plant garden off campus. And I enjoyed gardening and was out there, and somehow a black widow spider got into my coat and walked onto my hand. And it turns out it had released a near lethal dose of black widow toxin into my body. And I nearly died. I was hospitalized for 10 days. My gut was paralyzed. I couldn't even keep water down. I had a PICC line placed into my heart, and I shrunk to about 80 pounds. I had primitive brainstem symptoms of rhizus sardonicus and opisthotonus. My body kind of contracted into Parkinsonian-like symptoms. I had ischemic strokes. I lost my short and long-term memory. I couldn't add numbers in my head. But oddly, I would look at my doctoral thesis and I could understand quantum mechanical wave equations for nuclear magnetism. So I knew I was going to be okay. I just had no idea it would take so long. And initially, Tibetan medicine saved my life with the rinchen precious pills for removing venoms and toxins. And then I had more Tibetan medicine after the hospital for neuroinflammation and nerve regeneration. But then over time, I began to fail again and, would shrink to about 85 pounds and become very hot and bedridden. And then that's when Dr. Dondup and Dr. Banter and I found functional medicine. And eventually, Dr. Dondup and I took the functional medicine training in 2010 for 3 years. And at the end of that training, in 2013, 10 years ago, kind of figured out what was going on with me, that I was missing some key genes for glutathione and detoxification. I had alterations in my mitochondrial DNA and my urea cycle. And once I supported those, I turned myself around, and here I am sharing with you. But recently, and for the last 10 years since then, I've continued to use both Tibetan medicine and functional medicine for my care. And, once or twice a year, I'll do those labs that I shared with you just for prevention and maintenance. But I recently checked my telomeres and my rate of aging, and I was very pleased to learn that, my DNA, my telomeres are longer than my biological age, and the green dot here. And then I have a very slow rate of aging, 0.61 biological years for every one of my chronological years. So I was pleased to see this personal validation of this approach, but I've also seen it in hundreds of people that I've helped in the clinic, and Dr. Lovesong and Dr. Amy have seen thousands of clients. So in summary, from the view of functional Tibetan medicine, tonification involves processes such as evaluating and balancing the gut microbiome, including dietary modifications and balancing biochemistry, including hormones, nutrient deficiencies in the cardiovascular system. And once this balance is optimized, then detoxification of heavy metals, organic solvents, and pesticides and pathogenic microorganisms can proceed. And after detoxification, the rejuvenation protocols are implemented to restore structure and function and promote longevity. And we primarily use the Tibetan rejuvenation protocols of the herb mineral precious pills, herbal baths, medicated oils and massage, the Tibetan yogic exercises, in addition to the newbie direct current device. And so I'd like to conclude with a translation of the 4 immeasurables that are an integral part of Tibetan medicine and Buddhism. May all beings have happiness and the true cause of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the true cause of suffering. May all beings never be parted from the happiness that is without suffering. And may all beings abide in peace and equanimity, their minds free from the three mental poisons of attachment, anger, and ignorance. And I'd like to thank an anonymous donor who has generously supported this work for the past 4 years. And here's my email, cynthiahusted@me.com, if anyone would like, copies of our previous publications or to correspond. Thank you.